Paul Manafort, President Trump's former campaign chairman, leaving a federal courthouse in Washington on Monday. He pleaded not guilty to charges of tax fraud and money laundering. Creditazos Catapodis European press photo agency want to get this briefing by email. Here's the sign up. Good morning. Here's what you need to know. The first charges in the investigation by Robert Mueller into Russian ties to the Trump campaign did not implicate the president but collectively amounted to a political body blow, our chief White House correspondent writes. If you missed the flurry of developments on Monday, here's a wrap-up. Paul Manafort, President Trump's former campaign manager, and a business partner, Rick Gates, pleaded not guilty to charges of tax fraud and money laundering. We explain 5 key points from their indictment, which you can read here. Mr. Mueller also announced that a former campaign advisor, George Papadopoulos, had pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI and was cooperating with the inquiry. Mr. Trump said on Twitter today that Mr. Papadopoulos was merely a low-level volunteer. Our reporters in Washington explain it is now clear, from Mr. Papadopoulos' admission and emails related to a meeting at Trump Tower in June 2016, that the Russian government offered help to Mr. Trump's candidacy and campaign officials were willing to take it. George Papadopoulos, a 30-year-old aide to the Trump campaign, repeatedly sought to set up a meeting with Russian officials last year, according to court documents. We look at how he did it. We also traced the path of the $18 million that Paul Manafort is accused of laundering, including where he spent the money, more than $900,000 at an antiquarian store. For instance, in explaining the ambition that led to Mr. Manafort's downfall, a friend referred to the former Ukrainian president for whom Mr. Manafort did work. He could have kept running campaigns for the Yanukovychs of the world, and nobody would have cared. But he took on the Trump campaign because he believed that the country was going down the wrong path, and he wanted to make a difference. President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, has been charged with tax fraud and money laundering. But this isn't Mr. Manafort's first public scandal. Published on Oct. 30, 2017, credit image by Sam Hodgson for the New York Times. Previously undisclosed complaints of sexual harassment by Harvey Weinstein expand the time frame of his alleged wrongdoing to the 1970s. A spokeswoman for the Hollywood producer said that any allegations of non-consensual sex are unequivocally denied by Mr. Weinstein. How does the Times write about sexual assault? Our journalists and lawyers explain the terminology we use. A judge on Monday halted a White House policy barring military service by transgender troops, ruling that it was most likely unconstitutional and based on disapproval of transgender people generally. In announcing the ban in July, President Trump said that U.S. forces could not afford the tremendous medical costs and disruption of transgender troops. A protest in New York in July, after President Trump announced that transgender people may not serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Credit Spencer Platt. Getty Images. 3 people have been charged. George Papadopoulos may be the one to tell the most meaningful story. Listen on a computer, an iOS device or an Android device. President Uhuru Kenyatta was declared the winner of Kenya's presidential election on Monday, for the second time this year. The Supreme Court nullified the results of the first vote, in August, citing irregularities. Credit Yashuyoshi Chief Agents France Press. Getty Images. President Trump is expected to nominate Jerome Powell as chairman of the Federal Reserve, according to 2 people familiar with the plans. Mr. Powell, a Fed governor whom one White House official described as a safe choice, would replace Janet Yellen next year. A governor of the Federal Reserve since 2012, Jerome Powell has steadily supported the central bank's current approach to monetary policy. Credit Joshua Roberts. Reuters. 126 million Facebook users were exposed to inflammatory posts by Russian agents, a detailed disclosure about the scope of Moscow's influence on U.S. social media before the presidential election shows. We talked to 9 experts about how to improve the social media giant. Representatives from Facebook, Google and Twitter are to testify in Congress beginning today. The next season of House of Cards will be the last, Netflix said on Monday, a day after the show's star, Kevin Spacey, was accused of making a sexual advance on a 14-year-old boy in the 1980s. A spokeswoman said the decision to end the show was made months ago. U.S. stocks were down on Monday. Here's a snapshot of global markets. Tips, both new and old, for a more fulfilling life. You don't need to drain your battery before recharging, and other tech myths debunked. Clock. Seasonal shifts offer an opportunity to assess sleep habits. Recipe of the day: Monster Halloween cookies, a piece of New York history. In today's 360 video, walk among century-old fishing shacks in Hudson, NY, that were once at risk of being demolished but are now being preserved. A cluster of century-old fishing shacks in Hudson, NY, once at risk of being demolished, is now being preserved. Step inside one of the shacks and wander around the site. Published on Oct. 31, 2017. Credit image by Tony Senecola, The New York Times. Technology by Samsung. Partisan writing you shouldn't miss. Writers from across the political spectrum discussed the developments in the Russia investigation on Monday, in memoriam. Fred Beckey, a fabled mountaineer for 7 decades, was the first to take hundreds of routes to the summits of North America's tallest peaks. He was 94. Robert Blakely designed the yellow and black fallout shelter sign, a once ubiquitous symbol in the U.S. He was 95. They can't believe there's no butter. The French consume 3 times as much butter as Americans, so shortages are a problem in the land of the croissant. Interneting with Amanda Hesser. A reporter starts a new video series today about everything that's weird, wrong and totally sad about online culture. You can sign up here to be notified when episodes are published. Best of Late Night TV. The comedy hosts took stock of the charges filed against Paul Manafort. He's one eye patch away from being a Bond villain, Trevor Noah said. Quotation of the day: the lack of an ability to compromise led to the Civil War. John Kelly, the White House Chief of Staff, in an interview on Fox News. We begin Halloween with a ghost story. Stingy Jack invited the devil for a drink. These smiling faces have a spooky history. Credit Mike Seger's Irish folklore goes, Jack didn't want to pay for the drinks, so he persuaded the devil to turn himself into a coin that could be used to settle the bill. The devil agreed, but Jack ditched the tab and kept the coin. When he died, Stingy Jack was denied entry to both heaven and hell and was instead given a burning coal to light his way as he roamed the earth for eternity. He placed the coal in a carved-out turnip, turning it into a lantern. Stingy Jack became known as Jack of the Lantern, or Jack-o'-lantern, by the late 17th century. Elsewhere in Europe, making lanterns from potatoes and beets was part of a fall harvest celebration. Lights were also thought to ward off evil spirits. By the end of the 19th century, European immigrants in America switched their carving tradition to pumpkins. The fortunate pumpkin is a noble fruit, a joy in the mouth of mankind, a paean of autumn on the happy palate, a 1942 Times article proclaimed. The unfortunate pumpkin becomes a jack-o'-lantern. Remy Tubman contributed reporting. Your morning briefing is published weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern and updated all morning. Browse past briefings here. If photographs appear out of order, please download the updated New York Times app from iTunes or Google Play. What would you like to see here? Contact us at briefing@nytimes.com. You can get the briefing delivered to your inbox Sunday through Friday. We have 4 global editions, timed for the Americas, Europe, Asia and Australia. Check out our full range of free newsletters here.